Hey everybody, welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. As I promised last week, this week we're talking about profection years. And guess what? We're talking about them next week again. Why? Because it's kind of a big topic and it's going to have to be fit into 2 different episodes, kind of like how Titanic used to come on 2 videotapes. So what are profection years? Probably the first thing to mention is that it's profection, Profection, not perfection, which I know when you say it kind of quickly, which I'm sure I'll do lots of times throughout this week's episode and next, it might come out sounding like perfection years, but no, that's not it. Profection years are an astrological timing technique that enables you to take a look at what are the key themes that are playing out each year in your life. I guess to back that up a bit, astrological timing is basically predictive astrology, so it's looking ahead at different transits and different aspects as they arise and making predictions about what do you think is going to happen based on what that transit or that aspect is. Here's a quick example. Taking a look at your chart, you might cast ahead to Jupiter is going to be entering the sign that rules your 10th house. So let's say for argument's sake that you're a 10th house Cancer because Jupiter is in Cancer right now. So let's line it up with what's actually happening these days. You might have been looking for a job all last year and decided, what if I look into some astrology about this? Well, you could take a look at, are there going to be any transits happening with my 10th house? Because that's the house related to not just career, but big picture, life's work and ambition and stuff. So maybe you were searching for jobs because you were feeling underemployed and you were feeling like you weren't really doing your calling, like you were just kind of pushing paper and collecting a paycheck. You might take a look at the upcoming astrology and think to yourself, Jupiter entering my 10th house, that might be when the new job comes or when I finally get a whole lot more aligned with what my life's work truly is. So that's some dream job stuff right there, is Jupiter energy, because that's expansion and opportunities and all those lucky, opportunistic, wonderful things. I know the term lucky is kind of not always the best term to use in astrology circles because it kind of implies not having a whole lot of control, but just think more like blessings, fortunate stuff, all just like good things going on. That's Jupiter energy. So then you have that planet's energy, and then take a look at where is it happening in your chart. 10th house. So the house of lifetime ambitions and big picture career stuff, your legacy. How does the outside world perceive you? So we put the 2 together, Jupiter, abundance, opportunities, good stuff, in that realm of my life's work. Hey, see how you might be able to see that and go, all right, I'm going to keep an extra close eye on when Jupiter enters Cancer, because that's my 10th house. And that's when I think a lot of this energy is going to shift a bit and really start moving in a direction that I feel is really going to be beneficial for me. Now, of course, astrology can and is more complicated than that, but I wanted to throw you a pretty simple example, just so that way we can start dipping our toes into where we're going with this episode. There are actually a number of astrological timing techniques, and the one I just described, transits, is probably the most well-known and commonly used. But there are a couple others. There are progress charts. These are kind of like time-lapse natal charts, and they take a look at what's going on in your life right now based on basically how old you are. So actually kind of similar to profection years, but instead this is more of like, we're going to take your chart and based on the number of years you've lived thus far, we're going to kind of count it forward step by step. So if you're 25 years old, we're going to kick it forward 25 degrees. And I'm not going to get super duper into progress charts here because that's not what this episode's about, but it's just another example of a astrological timing technique. Another is Fidaria, which is an ancient Persian technique. I think Fidaria is fascinating. It kind of cuts your life up into different periods that align with different planets based on your transits, your chart, etc. But I'm also not enough of an expert to really talk about it intelligently here, so as much as I think it's cool, I still have a lot to learn about Fidaria, but maybe one day I'll have a guest on here who can talk quite a bit about Fidaria because it is really cool. What we're looking at today is profection years. Why did I just sample that Blink-182 song? Because there's actually some interesting astrology in that lyric, that idea that nobody likes you when you're 23. 23 is a 12th house profection year, and it's a tough year. You probably heard me in the most recent episode mention, yeah, I'm going through a 12th house profection year. Well, I'm not 23, I'm 35. And the wonderful thing about profection years is they're on a 12-year cycle. So, you get through your 12th house year, guess what? 12 years later, here it comes again. But to back it up a bit, let's talk about what profection years actually are. Think back to the most recent episode, and if you didn't listen to it, give it a listen now because you're going to want to have your natal chart handy. And more specifically, you're going to want to have the round version of your natal chart handy. So in your natal chart, you have the 12 houses. Those are those 12 pie slices that represent the different areas of your life. With profection years, the idea is that each year of your life aligns with one of the houses in your chart. So the first year of your life, from birth to age 1, is a first house year. And you're a baby, so you can't really remember and comment on it. But first house years are years focused on the self and the ego and the who am I in this world. As I mentioned, they're on a 12-year cycle. So then the 12th year of your life is also a first house year. Once again, you're exploring those themes of who am I? What's my sense of self? How am I presenting myself to the world? Who am I? What am I doing here? Who do I want to be? This is true regardless of which sign you have at your ascendant or anywhere else in your chart. The houses are fixed. That's why in everybody's chart, the first house is their ego, their sense of self, all of those things. And then the sign that they have ruling that house is how they experience all those first house things. Profection years work the same way. A first house year is first house themes. Now, later in this episode and into the next, we're going to get into how these get more individualized to your chart. And spoiler, yes, you might have guessed it, it is based on which signs you have ruling each house and then where different planets are. We're going to get into all of that, but first, big picture before we go deep. That's really the concept of profection years. To help you visualize, I'm going to throw up a profection years chart on my Instagram, and I think I might actually write up a Substack post about this too and send it out. So if you're not subscribed, go do that. You can sign up on my website. You can find me OMG Tarot on Substack. If you're really having a tough time finding me, just DM me on Instagram. I'll send the link. But yeah, I'll do that for you guys as well so you have a visual. Counting forward from birth, you can take a look at all the other profection years. So year 1, from your first to your second birthday, is a second house year. The following year that you are 2 years old, so going from your second to your third birthday, that's a third house year. And you can see some dovetailing between profection years and solar return charts. And then once you kind of get a bit more into astrology and getting familiar and having fun with your chart, you can use these two to speak to each other. So you could do a deep dive into what this profection year is for you in your life right around your birthday while running a solar return chart. And then you can actually take a look at the different transits and things happening in your solar return chart and compare it against that profection year and just glean a lot of insight about what's coming up for you, which a solar return chart is just a natal chart run for a given birthday of yours. So let's say it's your 29th birthday. You just enter all the same things. So the date, that's your birthday, the time of your birth, and then the location, which not the location you were born in, but the location you're turning 29 in. So if you're on vacation somewhere, you put in that location. And it's basically the natal chart you would have if you were born in that very moment at that very place. But you can then compare that solar return chart against your original birth chart to take a look at, well, what's on the docket for you. So why did I suggest that nobody likes you when you're 23 and that that's rooted in astrology? Well, because as I mentioned, 23 is a 12th house year, and so is 35, so is 47, so is 59, so is 11. Profection years are cyclical, so a 12th house year always comes before a first house year. 12th house years are psychologically uncomfortable. The themes present in 12th house years tend to be themes of endings and closure and questioning, what are my belief systems? What on earth have I been doing? In fact, to tie it back to tarot, think about the difference between the moon card and the sun card. How in the moon, you have to get to those uncomfortable, not so nice, shadowy kind of places in order to do the work necessary to then emerge as the sun card, that naked baby on the horse who's smiling and happy and being absolutely true to themselves. in order to have that first house year of I'm discovering myself, who am I, you kind of have to go through that tearing down of the old sense of self and the, ooh, what do I not want to bring forward with me? What maybe isn't so great? You might find yourself feeling kind of lost in these 12th house years. And maybe they meant to do this, maybe they didn't. But that's where I think Blink-182 was absolutely genius with this song, because it's largely about feeling kind of in between phases of life when you're about 23 years old. That song is the 12th house profection year, and I kind of wonder if they ever publicly addressed that. And if so, I think that would be so cool. Maybe I'll look it up. I know making astrology-coded songs is more of a Taylor Swift behavior, but hey, who knows? Maybe Blink-182 did it first. And I just love how succinct they are with it. Nobody likes you when you're 23. And now, of course, that's not actually true, but it can sure feel that way when you're going through a 12th house year. I'm not going to get too much into my stuff here, but just a heads up, 12th house over in OMG land. There's been a lot of rearranging, some things that ideally are setting me up for a way better first house year. Because if 35 is a 12th house year, 36 is a first house year. When you're looking ahead to upcoming profection years, sometimes I find it can be helpful to take a look at what was that profection year like last time for you. So 24 is a first house year. And now, of course, you're not going to have the exact same things happen, but you are going to have themes that repeat themselves and echo and maybe feel like they kind of resolve certain cycles and speak to each other. So thinking back to the year I was 24, that was the year I started my first business. It felt like the career that I'm in now had its launch then, back in 2014. Could you make the argument that now this 12th house year that's following that first house year, so we're now at the closing part of this cycle, is the closing of that cycle that began back in 2014? I think a lot of astrologers would say, yeah, there are a lot of the themes that you're dealing with in terms of closure and endings are things that got themselves started 12 years ago when you began this profection cycle. And perhaps that's why 12th house years can feel so daunting and so scary, because you spent the past 12 years getting used to certain routines and having certain things that are normal and expected, which, yeah, I'm sure you've gone through lots of changes throughout the past 12 years. Everyone does. But now we're looking at more dramatic paradigm shifts. Now we're looking at more kind of taking down of the things that you had been building up and removing what's not serving you. That can be kind of scary, because then you're like, what's next? Then you've got 47 is another 12th house year, and then 59, which that then coincides with your second Saturn return. So if you're 59 and going through it or know someone who is, just know, yeah, that is astrologically a time of a lot of departures and a lot of big changes, and really just your point of view and your life is dramatically changing. I can only speak to it from this astrologer's perspective, haven't been there yet, but just take a look at that. You've got a 12th house year and a Saturn return happening at the same time. It's a lot on your plate. Let's take a look at the individual profection years, especially if you're not currently looking at a profection chart, because I know a lot of you are probably listening to this while you're doing something else, like driving or working out or cooking dinner. Those tend to be when I listen to podcasts. A profection year's themes largely mirror what that house's themes are in astrology. So if you're familiar with astrological houses, keep that in mind. And if you're not, I did talk about it a bit in the most recent episode, How to Read Your Natal Chart, which, as I mentioned in that episode, is going to help you with this week's and next week's. So, and don't worry, I'm going to go over the themes here too. A first house year. Which years of your life are those? Those are the very first year of your life, so the year that you are less than 1 year old. It's year 12, it's year 24, it's year 36, and it's year 48. It's also year 60, and just keep on going from there, so it's year 72. One thing you might notice about first house years is that they line up with your Chinese zodiac. I don't know a ton about Chinese astrology, really beyond the animals, and that I know there's an element system, and I'm a metal horse, but could I tell you much about that? No. I'd like to learn more, though. But anyway, a first house year is a year that you're really feeling yourself. So when, let's say you're a year of the dragon, when it is year of the dragon, maybe you feel a little boost of like, yeah, that's me. But in general, that's first house year themes. Kind of like when it's the astrological season of your rising sign, you might tend to be really feeling yourself that season. It's kind of a thing. Because first house themes, as I mentioned, they're all about you. They're all about who am I? How am I presenting myself to the world? Your rising sign is sometimes called the mask you wear or the character that you present, which I kind of like that second one because the mask can kind of imply that you're hiding behind it. And really, it's kind of more of like, what is the persona that you present to everybody else? Sometimes astrologers will point to your rising sign as the sign that determines how you look. So really, how are you presented to the rest of the world? And then others will say, wait, that doesn't make sense. Your genetics determine how you look. If you're from a family of square-jawed, tall people, I don't care what your rising sign is, you're probably going to have square jaws and be kind of tall. And yeah, I think a better way to conceptualize the whole idea of your rising sign being how you look is a little more what vibe do you give off, and a little more how do you tend to style yourself. I'll give a great example. This woman that I know, she's an Aquarius rising, and she has such a cool look. Like, she's got this whole, like, punk rock alt thing going on, and not in, like, an ostentatious, I just walked out a Hot Topic kind of way, but just, you see her with her docs, you see her with, like, just, you could tell that she's artfully put together in, like, a, well, there's no better way to describe it than just like a punk rock kind of pushback, kind of grungy, cool, interesting way. I just love her style. And if you're listening and you know who you are, yeah, you know I love your style. If you've got a fire rising sign, you probably tend to gravitate toward more exciting outfits and more flashy imagery. You probably want like the big sunglasses or the wide leg jeans, just something that makes you look fabulous. Because remember, the first house is all about how you envision yourself. Who do you think you are? And that's going to translate into how you style yourself and how you move through the world. So it's not even necessarily so much just how you naturally look, but there is some part of how you make yourself look through your idea and your sense of who am I? And just to circle back to the Hot Topic comment, well, I'm probably decades too old to be shopping there, but I still shop at Hot Topic. And yeah, you all know that my rising sign is Scorpio. But so a first house year is that year where you might be feeling like anything's possible, and you might be feeling like there's a lot of emphasis on carving your own path and making yourself known and seen. It could actually have some kind of Fool vibes, I think, because think about that. The Fool is the main character, and a first house year is you're feeling that main character energy. You're also, if we want to think about this in terms of cycles, you're also starting that journey, so you're kicking off the next cycle. So age 24, age 11, age 36, age 48, you feel like you're kicking something off and starting something fresh. And now, does that mean that everybody's experience at these ages is exactly the same? No, not at all. The sign that you have ruling your first house is essentially the filter through which you're seeing your world and experiencing these first house themes. So let's say, for example, you are a Taurus rising, and you have your 24th birthday. Yay, happy birthday! So you're now moving into this next year of your life that's very marked by you being the main character and you really asserting your way through the world as you come off that year of being 23 and feeling kind of a bit lost, a bit, what am I doing here? You now feel like you've got the steering wheel in your hands, and for you, it's very Taurian. So you might find yourself coming very face to face with, well, what do I really love? What do I want to immerse myself in? Because remember, Taurus is very sensual. Taurus is ruled by Venus, and so that's all very, what do I want to surround myself with? What kinds of environments do I really want to be in? Perhaps a Taurus rising's 24th year might see them moving to a new location that they feel speaks to them as an individual a whole lot more. Or you might see them just becoming very unapologetic and embracing the things that they truly love and truly value. You might see them really committing themselves to a cause, or possibly walking away from what they thought was their dream and they thought they wanted to do. And being stubborn about it, because, I mean, it's Taurus. They are stubborn, they are fixed, they are earthy. So if you turn 24 and you want to go move to a hippie commune where you just hang out with trees all day, hey, I get it. Another key part of interpreting a profection year for yourself is looking at the ruling planet of that year's house, which we're not getting into this week because then this podcast is going to be like an hour plus long. So hold tight on that. Let's just talk about signs this week because then we have something to talk about next week and the planets add even more flavor. So, all right, house 2. The second house is concerned with things like, what do I love? What do I value? What do I hold dear? What are my possessions? Which maybe Taurus rising wasn't the best example because then that sounded very second house coded, which Taurus is the second house's natural ruler, which we can talk more about next time. But just know that, yeah, the second house is inherently a little bit Taurian because it is concerned with your personal values and also your personal possessions. I like to think of this house as what do you hold dear, both tangibly and intangibly. So it's the things that you hold close, and it's also your relationship to those material assets. So like, how do you think and feel about your money, your income, the actual things you have? As well as what are the intangible things that you value? Maybe you put a lot of emphasis on communicativeness in relationships, or maybe you put a lot of emphasis and value on loyalty between family members or between people who work together. This is all about what's most important to you. And when you're in a second house year, you might find yourself confronting themes of, well, what do I really value? What do I hold close? You might even find some shifts regarding these things. You might come into the year thinking that you hold certain values or that you value certain possessions, and then just as life comes at you over the course of that year, you might find your perspective shifting. Remember, these profection years are all about personal growth, so you could very well start a year with one set of perspectives and mindsets and then end it very differently. Which also, I just want to kind of drop a note here. Your profession year starts on your birthday. So not January 1st of that year, but whatever birthday you have up until the following birthday. So it's the year you were 25, not 2025. Unless you happen to have been born on New Year's Day, in which case that's cool. So house 2 is ages 13, 25, 37, and 49. And then, as always, just keep adding 12 onto that. So 61, 73. Just like the first house, the sign that you have ruling your second house adds some flavor as to how are you going to be learning these lessons and in what direction are they going to be focused. If I could talk about him for a second, my husband is currently going through a second house year, and for him, that sign is Capricorn. He also saw quite a career glow up this year. I'm really proud of him, and you see that Capricornian energy, that very ambitious, that very, I'm going to set the bar super high, and then I'm going to reach it, playing out in his house of personal finances and values, and it's actually just been kind of lovely to be the astrologer in the house, watching things unfold for him and then knowing what I read into his solar return chart and profection years for him, which also he's not a big astrology guy, so I just kind of tell him what's going on and he just kind of says okay. But let's say for argument's sake that the sign ruling your second house is Pisces. And in the example of the woman I mentioned who has really cool style, that would be it for her because the zodiac signs follow each other. So if you're first house Aquarius, your second house Pisces. If you're a first house Aries, your second house Taurus, and so on and so forth. So if you've got a Piscean second house, you're still going to be going through this profection year, examining your values and what you hold close and what's actually important to you. But with Pisces at the helm, it's not going to be as linear and as material as somebody with an earth sign there. So for you, you might find yourself coming face to face with a lot of your personal beliefs and what are the things that you find value in reflecting on. This would be a deeply spiritual year for you. In fact, I think wherever Pisces is in your chart, those profection years are going to be spiritual for you in terms of really getting in touch with what does your soul need and what do you believe in and what are you after? What are you doing here? It's going to be reflective. I also think it's kind of interesting to take a look at the ages that are these different profection years and finding certain ones that are just universal. 13 is a second house year, and just think about that. So much of adolescence is concerned with differentiating yourself from your family and separating yourself from your parents so that way you can grow into your own individual. That involves a lot of reflection on your values and what's actually important to you. You might find yourself rejecting certain values that you were raised with and embracing other ones. And then when you're adult, you might look back and be like, wow, I was cringe. But at 13, that's developmentally critical. Then you revisit those kind of themes again at 25, which maybe you feel like an adolescent a second time, or maybe you just feel like, all right, now that I'm firmly into my 20s, it really is time to dial in what's actually important to me. Who am I going to be as I move through this next phase of my life? You revisit that again at 37. What's important now? Because what was important at 25 is probably not as important to you at 37. And then things that weren't even crossing your mind at 25 are all of a sudden very important at 37. The third house is all about communication and how your mind works, and also who are you in small groups. It's the house of siblings and neighbors and classmates, all the people who are physically very close to you. One way that I tend to think about it also is that third house is who are you in a small group, 11th house is who are you in a big group. So 11th house is kind of who are you as a member of your community or a citizen of your nation, versus third house is who are you as a member of this family. It's also short-term travel and early education. Another way to think about this, and if you're interested, go back and listen to the astrological axes episode, because I talk a lot about houses that are opposite each other on the zodiac wheel, but house 3 sits opposite of house 9, and one way that you can conceptualize between these two is that house 3 is very immediate education. It's things like, what are you learning in grammar school, and what are you learning day to day from the people immediately around you? Versus house 9 is big picture stuff. It's what are you learning more abstractly, more philosophically? What might you learn at college? So it's less about what's super duper practical for the day to day, and more about what are kind of the big picture life lessons that you learn and carry with you. Both forms of education are very important, but over here in the third house, we're talking about that more immediate practical stuff. Third house ages include age 2, age 14, age 26, age 38, age 50. You might find yourself learning a lot of very practical lessons in this year, and a lot of just kind of learning from the University of Hard Knocks, as they call it, or learning on the job is maybe a nicer way of putting it. But just very learning by doing and learning from the people who are immediately around you. To use an analogy, this might not be the kind of lessons that you learn from your teacher, but the kind of lessons that you learn from your peers. So what are the cheat codes? What are the study hacks? What are all the things that the students are passing around in the notebooks to help each other pass the test and get good grades? This isn't high-level pedagogy here. To share an example of a third house year from my life, I can look back on when I was 26. Remember how I said I started my first business at 24? Well, I started it, and then 2 years or so later was when it really felt like it was starting to hit its stride and take shape and actually make sense. Initially, I started a small business mostly as kind of a side hustle that was keeping me afloat, and I did not have high expectations of it being anything beyond that. I thought it was going to be a stopgap between employment, honestly. But then, somewhere around the 18 months to 2-year mark in, I was like, maybe this is my career. Maybe this is what I'm going to do. And it's not lost on me that that was during not only a third house year for me, but a house where in my chart, I have a big giant stellium that's ruled by Capricorn. So very ambitious linked, very long-term planning. What am I building my life for? And also what's grounding me linked. But let's say you have Scorpio in your third house. For you, third house might not be a very career-y year at all. It's really only going to be very career-y if you have other placements that are kind of directing it that way. For Scorpio, a third house year might mean a total transformation in terms of who are you surrounding yourself with. You might have to cut off some friends. You might have to turn away from the community that shaped you and enveloped you. Or if you stick around, you might be the one playing a pivotal role in tearing it down and building it back up again, or transforming it in some other meaningful way. Because for you, Scorpio is the one that's casting its shadow over this year. You're doing deeply transformative, rise from the ashes, and yeah, possibly some contrarian things. I think if you have Scorpio there in your third house, that might also feel like a very productive year for you because Scorpio is ruled by Mars traditionally. It's ruled by Pluto in modern astrology, and we're going to talk more about that next week. But Mars is a very getting stuff done planet because it's how you exert your energy. Similarly, if you have Aries in the third house, that might also feel like a year of a lot of accomplishment because Aries is also ruled by Mars. So for you, you might be exerting your will all over the place, but unlike our friend with Scorpio over here, our Aries third houser is more of a leader and a motivator and a starter. So you might find yourself being called to take on a leadership role with your friends, your classmates, those close to you, and essentially having to call the shots that year. And this might be true regardless of what other placements you have. Maybe you're definitely more of a follower, but that third house year, you might find yourself, age 38, having to step up and be the leader. Then we get to the fourth house, which is all about your roots. It's about the family that shaped you. It's about your ancestry. It's about the home that really turned you into who you are now. It's what you return to when you need some comfort, and it's also your emotions. I think a good way I once heard it described is that your third house is your IQ and your fourth house is your EQ. The fourth house can also speak to your inner world. Fourth house years include 3, 15, 27, 39, 51, and 63. And when you're having a fourth house year, you may find yourself facing themes that I just described. So you might find yourself having a homecoming of sorts, or perhaps connecting with your family in maybe a new or different way, or just really affirming the loyal bonds and the roots that you have with them. There might be a lot of emphasis on your home life or your private life here, and I think there's also a lot of room to say you might do some ancestral work or reconnection with your roots when you're going through a fourth house year. Let's say you have Leo ruling your fourth house. This might play out as you taking a whole lot of pride in your heritage and your lineage and maybe even your individual family. This might be a year that you find yourself going to bat for them and maybe even being the public face of the family. I think with a Leo fourth house, this would be a very celebratory year. Perhaps this is the year that the baton gets passed to you to start hosting the family holidays and various events like that. Versus, let's say you had a Cancer fourth house. For you, the connection to your roots and your home and your family and all of that might be a lot more about returning to your roots and getting comfortable with that emotional foundation. Cancer isn't flashy and fabulous the way Leo is. Cancer is introverted. Cancer turns inward and reflects and protects. A Gemini fourth house year will involve a lot of communication. Communication probably with family members, but then also perhaps some opening up about your inner world. Maybe a Gemini fourth houser might start journaling this year, or they might start going to therapy, or they just might do something that involves that very Gemini communication and connecting with others, but also is always going to come back to those fourth house themes. I'm really trying to make sure I hit every sign in here just so that way everyone listening hopefully at least gets one example that matches up with their chart, I hope. The fifth house is the house of drama and play. It's the house of flirtiness and dating and creativity and all the things that just light you up. It's self-expression and it's hobbies, and it's also children in two different ways. It's largely your children, if you're a parent, but it's also your inner child. It's your sense of, what does child like me need? In a fifth house year, these are the things you're working with. It's self-expression. It's all of those things. It's the drama. It's the play. These years are 4, 16, 28, 40, 52, 64, and add on to that by continuing to add 12. A fifth house year is when you're 16 and you decide to dye your hair some wacky color like bright blue or orange or pink or something like that. It's when you're 40 and decide to finally try that hobby that you've always kind of sort of wanted to try, but now you've got the time to do it. It's you're 52 and your kids are grown or almost there, and you're able to slacken the reins a bit and have more of a peer-to-peer relationship rather than a very strict top-down one. This is also the house involved with risk-taking. So if you've got a Sagittarius fifth house, I feel like a very obvious thing is you might move abroad or make some other drastic move. You might be like, well, let's take a risk. Let's move to a whole different country, and when I get there, then I'll figure it out. Or maybe you've got a Virgo 5th house. Maybe for you, you're leaning all the way into a hobby that you love and you're bringing that Virgoian sense of responsibility and dedication to it to actually see it through. Maybe for you, you're that one who's kind of always wanted to try something, but maybe you never had the time or the money or the energy. And this year you're like, you know what? It's never going to happen if I don't put myself in all the way. Maybe you've got a Scorpio 5th house, and this is the year that you make some very drastic extreme changes that better serve your inner child. Maybe there's some wounds that need to get healed, and your Scorpio 5th house is doing that this year. Maybe this plays out as getting real about the kind of people you date and how you approach dating, because dating and romance are 5th house themes. That might mean you decide that you're not into short-term things anymore, and you're just going to be real and honest that, hey, I want something for the long term and something for serious. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you're like, you know what? I'm going to have fun on these apps. I'm not going to come in with any sort of expectations. In any case, what marks it as a Scorpio 5th house year is that it's a dramatic departure for you. So how are you transforming what you're doing? Once we get to the 6th house, it's all about service. How are you serving your mental health and your physical health? What are your daily routines? Basically, what do you do all day? The 6th house can also speak a lot to the environment in which you conduct yourself doing what it is you do all day. So it's your work environment. Literally, as you perform that work and that service, where are you doing it? And as I mentioned, health is a big part of the 6th house. So when you're going through a 6th house year, you might find more of a focus on your health, be it physical or mental. You may find yourself with a renewed interest in wellness and really maybe embracing certain wellness things like working out or getting into juicing and making healthy stuff. Or it could be more mental, like deciding that you're going to get off social media or you're otherwise going to find a way to get away from the things that stress you out or find a way to manage them more effectively so they don't stress you out quite as much. A 6th house year might involve a wake-up call about your health. It could also be a significant year regarding the work environment, and there could be a focus on the service that you provide to others, and also the service you provide to yourself. In general, how are you serving? This can extend to a sense of duty. So for you, a 6th house year could also come with an instance where you need to step up to the plate, and you might have to do something that you don't want to do, but you need to do. There's a lot of responsibility in the 6th house. These years are 5, 17, 29, 41, 53, and then, as always, just keep adding 12 to find the rest of the 6th house profection years. And it's not lost on me that 29 is a 6th house year, because at 29, you're in the midst of your first Saturn return. Now, for some people, that Saturn return begins a bit sooner, or it could start once they've already become 29, but basically, somewhere between 28 and 30, you're experiencing what's known as your first solar return. I know I alluded to the second solar return a bit earlier, and basically the long and short of it is it's the point when Saturn returns to where it was in your original birth chart. Saturn takes about 2.5 to 3 years to transit through a particular sign, and it takes, give or take, 29 years to make its way through all 12 zodiac signs. So Saturn was where it was on the day you were born, and that's represented by where Saturn is in your natal chart. And then over the next 29-ish years, it makes its way through all the following degrees and signs. By the time it comes back around, you're having your Saturn return. Saturn, being the planet of responsibility and time passing and being a grown-up, essentially, it's maturity, it's wisdom, it's all of those things associated with aging and developing. Once you're in that Saturn return, you typically feel a level up in that way. So that's why I'm saying 29 being a 6th house year just makes a lot of sense, because now you're facing themes of duty and responsibility, and also, how am I taking care of myself? How am I showing up day to day? And how am I both contributing and taking care of myself in the process? For some of these earlier 6th house profection years, you can see these kind of themes as well. 17. In most places, the age of majority is 18. 17, that's really your last year of childhood, and depending on where you are in the world and what your expectations and goals are, you're probably looking at finishing school soon, and maybe you're looking at life in the workforce, or maybe moving on to higher education. There's a lot of focus at 17 on what kind of adult are you going to be and how are you going to step into the next phase of your life. And even 5, that's a 6th house profection year, and for a lot of people, and maybe this isn't so much the case outside the US, but I think it is in a lot of places, that's about when you start school. So there's a lot of growing up in that. You're going from being home all day or maybe doing school part-time to, now you're officially a student. You're officially in the system. For someone with Capricorn in their 6th house, this is all working out just ducky. You feel like you're really leaning into your element this year and feeling like things are going right because Capricorn loves that stuff. Capricorn loves responsibility and moving forward and that sense of duty. So for you, I'd say these 6th house themes are definitely happening in isolation, but I think they also work into the bigger plan that they're serving your longer term goals. That's also compounded by Capricorn's ruling planet, Saturn, now being essentially the planetary main character of your 6th house year, but we're going to save that discussion for next week. Next up, we've got the 7th house, the house of marriage and other partnerships. I think it's also important to note here that this is the house about your interpersonal style. So, who are you as a partner? It's not just about your partners, it's also about you as a partner. How do you support a partner? How do you show up as somebody's best friend or spouse or even their business partner? If you've got Aries here, you're the motivating partner. You're the one who's the doer and the one who's like, yeah, I'm the idea person. Let's go. Let's make it happen. Let's go. Let's do it. If you've got Aquarius here, you're the partner who pushes others to look at things differently and to see the world through a different lens. You subvert expectations in close relationships, and for some, that's very unsettling. For others, they crave it because they've never met somebody like you. I think someone with Aquarius in their 7th house is likely kind of polarizing, and perhaps they've often had challenges forming close partnerships because Aquarius is notably kind of detached, kind of cold, and very independent, so you show up with a strong sense of independence, and it's not always easy to find the right partner who that works for. Your 7th house years are 6, 18, 30, 42, 54, 66, 78, and this is a year that you'll likely just find a lot of emphasis on who are you partnering with. If you don't meet a new partner this year, you might be strengthening bonds with an existing one or spending some time evaluating who am I as part of a relationship. These years might have you growing in your relationship. And remember, I say relationship, this is all kinds of one-to-one relationships. The important point here is that it's a very one-to-one back and forth, a lot like the Lover's card. It's not groups. So you might even find yourself relying on your partner a whole lot more during these years. These are the kind of years that test relationships. Once we're in an 8th house here, don't think you're out of the woods on testing relationships because the 8th house also has a lot to do with relationship stuff. However, it's a little bit different. The 7th house is about the relationship itself. It's about who's showing up here, what is each person contributing, how are we supporting and complementing each other. The 8th house is where things go a little bit deeper. It's the intimacy and the chemistry. Maybe you could even think of it like House 7 is what are the two parts coming together, and then House 8 is what they've created by coming together. The 8th house is essentially the sum of its parts. And the 8th house isn't explicitly about relationships, but it does have a lot of relationship-y themes because it's the merging of finances. It's intimacy in all of its forms, so emotional, physical, material. It actually has a lot to do with material intimacy, like sharing resources, and it's often called the house of other people's money. The 8th house also rules sudden losses, as well as inheritance. There's a lot of transformation involved in the 8th house. Keep this idea of sudden losses in the back of your mind because the 8th house also rules death. And just remember, it's literal death as well as death card kind of deaths. So what's getting cleared out to make room for what comes next and what's fresh? Trauma is also part of the 8th house. This is the house of things that are often kind of uncomfortable. Even when they're positive things like partnering with someone and merging your finances, there can be a sense of discomfort because now somebody else has access to your resources, and now how you manage those things is completely different. Even if it's a net positive, that's still a transformation, and it can be a bit of a jarring change. If you've got Gemini here, you might be one to really intellectualize these things. You might think about them first before you feel about them. So for you, an 8th house year that involves a lot of that intimacy, merging, and perhaps some very abrupt changes, you might find yourself doing a lot of thinking. It may end up being a very intellectually heavy year for you, even though these things are pretty emotionally tinged. You, Gemini, are kind of being more of a thinker about it. And hey, that's you do you. With Gemini in your 8th house, that kind of tends to be how you approach these parts of your life. The ages for 8th house profection years are 7, 19, 31, 43, and 55. To bring it back to the idea of opposite houses, the 8th house sits opposite the 2nd house. So think about that in terms of that whole seesaw idea, that while the 2nd house is all about your personal assets and your personal values that you as an individual hold, the 8th house is the shared part of that. It's what are my shared resources? What are even my shared values? Because when you are in the sort of relationship with somebody that you're sharing resources, you have that intimate, mature, built-up relationship, values need to align. If you guys aren't in alignment about what's important to you, how is this relationship going to work? One thing that I like to do with profection years is also to look back on the different years of my life and see how the different profection years panned out. One thing that I've just noticed personally is that similar themes tend to come up in opposite year houses. So in both 2nd and 8th house years, they kind of echo each other. They might have themes and events that are similar, and we could say they rhyme. They're not exactly the same, but they have enough similarities that it feels like, oh, okay, I'm seeing that idea come around again. I'm once again revisiting this lesson, and now I'm adding on to it. It's part 1 and then part 2. And then 6 years later, when we get back to the first one, that was our part 1, might that be part 3? Right now, as I work my way through this 12th house year, I'm actually seeing a lot of echoes from my most recent 6th house year. Next up, we got 9th house years. The 9th house is all about expanding your mind. It's higher education, it's philosophy, it's contact with other cultures. It's also your ethical foundation. So while house 2 is all about your personal values, house 9 has to do with the ethical framework that those values are built on. When you're going through a 9th house year, you likely will feel like your world is expanding. You may find yourself having to learn new things or being pulled in a way that forces you to adapt and reframe how you think about things. You also might find yourself reconfiguring your moral code here. Religion tends to come up a lot in the 9th house, so you could also find yourself engaging with your spiritual beliefs. And now, I know the 12th house is spiritual as well, and I know there is some nuanced difference between the idea of spiritual versus religious. A lot of people consider religious to be a little more structured and have to do with a community in addition to the spiritual beliefs. So I see it like that. That makes sense. And so just keep that in mind when you're thinking about the 9th house, that it's more about what are the mores and the structures involved in that spiritual practice. So the religious aspect of it. Publishing and broadcasting are also part of the 9th house, and when you drop it into context with these other themes, it makes a lot of sense because when you're broadcasting your own thoughts or publishing them, you are expressing your values and expressing your ethics. You're basically positioning yourself as a thought leader. So another thing that tends to come up in 9th house years is you getting your voice out there and really projecting it outward. Remember how I said that the 9th house is opposite the 3rd house? And the 3rd house has a lot to do with your communication. Well, the 9th house does too, but again, think of it as this difference between if the 3rd house is close conversations. So who are you chatting with? Who are you communicating with day to day and in your text messaging and just who's close to you? The 9th house is, well, it's you having a podcast. It's you writing blog posts that are read by people across the world. It's you kind of almost a bit detached from the community, but also projecting it in a bigger, broader, more authoritative kind of way. The ages for ninth house years are 8, 20, 32, 44, 56, and 68, and go on from there. And to throw out some examples of signs, let's say you have Leo in your ninth house. For you, these ninth house years might be years where you see your influence growing significantly, versus let's say you have Virgo there. In your case, a ninth house year might be one where you tend to more so lead by example, and perhaps even internalize different values and codes through attention to detail and studying. For you, this year might look a lot like the Hermit, and it might involve some pulling back and just doing that studying instead of necessarily being so projective with what you're doing. You're still expanding your mind and your reach in all these ways, but for Virgo, it's more about auditing and taking account of stuff, versus Leo, it's more about roaring loudly. Then we got the 10th house. This is big picture stuff. Once again, we can return to that idea of opposite houses. And just like I said, the 4th house is all about your inner world. Yeah, the 10th house is all about your public image. It's who are you to everyone on the outside who's looking in. The 10th house is often associated with your career, but just keep in mind that this isn't all it is. Just because it's often the career house doesn't mean it's only the career house. It's career plus public image plus legacy plus life's work. It's all of those big things. It's basically the best way, I think, to put the 10th house is what's the mark that you're leaving on the world? When strangers talk about you, what do they bring up? I think that the things that they're going to bring up are things indicated by your 1st house and your 10th house, because they're going to mention what you look like, and they're going to mention what you do and what their interactions with you are like. 10th house also speaks a lot to your status in society. This is also where your midheaven is, and I think we're going to save the discussion of the midheaven for next week because this episode's already getting pretty long. But the years where you tend to feel the biggest impact of all eyes are on me, how am I leaving my mark on the world, are the years that you're 9, 21, 33, 45, 57, 69. All of those are 10th house profection years. These are big years for your career and your life's work if your life's work isn't your career. Maybe you just work a job to pay your bills and your genuine life calling is something entirely different that doesn't turn a profit for you. For someone with Cancer in the 10th house, I would think that a 10th house year for you involves a lot of bringing your personal inner self to your public outer self. So bringing more of yourself into the work you do and really personalizing and in some cases, I think even personifying the work that you're doing. I think you could also have a tendency to feel your public image hitting a lot closer to home in your 10th house profection year. So if you got Cancer there, you might be someone who typically compartmentalizes your personal and private lives, and then when you're going through a 10th house year, those compartments might bleed into each other. In contrast, let's say you have Scorpio in the 10th house. For you, these years might feel like years where you really increase the intentionality of what you're doing and that everything is deliberate and purposeful and done in order to achieve a certain ends. The 11th house is the house associated with big groups. So as I mentioned, communities, broad audiences. If the 9th house is focused on you and what content you're putting out there, the 11th house is focused on the people consuming it. So this one could speak to your relationship to your followers and your audience. You might be setting a trend in the 9th house, but who's following it? You're going to find some clues to that in the 11th house. The 11th house also has to do with technology and the future. How are you looking forward toward the future and embracing modern technologies? Or aren't you? Maybe you have a placement or a planet here that makes you a little technophobic or a little slow to adopt new technology. This is the house where you'll find humanitarianism, and I think one good way to visualize the 11th house is to think about the star card. Remember how the figure in that card is pouring from the decanter into the pond? That's what's happening here. It's not so much that you're in the group and being a peer, it's you. How are you giving to the collective? How are you supporting that whole? I think it's also kind of interesting that the 11th house rules social media, which I think there was a point when these house systems were created that it did not rule social media. And I just think it's kind of interesting that, when new things come out and become part of our world, how do they get assigned astrologically? Also, you want to hear an interesting 11th house profection year story? Here's one from my personal life. I started this podcast during an 11th house profection year. So, see? We got technology, we got audiences, we got social media, all rolled into one. Ages for an 11th house profection year are 10, 22, 34, 46, 58, and 70. For what it's worth, I've got Virgo in my 11th house, so it's a little unsurprising that one of the big themes of my 11th house year was creating this podcast, which is very communicative. You're literally listening to my voice compressed and stuck onto Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, the communication planet. And as a little sneak peek about what we're going to be doing next week, well, take a look at where is the ruling planet of that sign in your chart. My Mercury happens to be in my 3rd house, which, the communication house, the house of peer-to-peer close conversations. So is it any wonder that this podcast is really structured just a lot like a chat between us? And then we get to our 12th house, the house that I kicked off this episode talking quite a bit about. The 12th house is what's hidden from the surface. It's your spiritual life. It's your belief system. And a lot of times it can speak to things like limiting beliefs and challenging those limiting beliefs. There's a lot of sense of closure and endings in the 12th house, what with it being the final house and all. When you compare it with the 6th house, there also is a sense of service here, but think about it like the difference between how the Hierophant's a teacher and how the High Priestess is a teacher. While the Hierophant teaches you things that are very useful and critical to your day-to-day life and operating and conducting yourself on this regular, tangible, mortal plane, the High Priestess is the teacher who guides you in your spiritual development. She's the one who opens the door to all kinds of abstract ideas. And I think you can take this idea and apply it to understanding the 6th and 12th houses, because in the 6th house, that's your day-to-day service. That's how do I do my job? How do I run my errands? How do I take care of me in terms of preventative maintenance and going to the gym and stuff like that? Versus the 12th house is, how do I take care of me by fueling my soul? How do I take care of me by challenging my limiting beliefs and giving myself space to learn and grow and also let go of things that aren't serving me anymore? How do I get comfortable with discomfort? Because, as I mentioned, this is the house of nobody likes you when you're 23 or 35 or 47. It's all of that. Maybe you've got Libra here, and your 12th house year is marked by thoughts about how am I serving others versus how am I serving myself. Libra can be notoriously people-pleasy. You might find yourself detaching from certain behaviors that you're only doing just to keep the peace. In fact, peace as a concept is probably going to be a big part of your Libra 12th house year. You might find yourself having to detach from always needing to make everything balanced and everything equitable and fair. Maybe life's not fair and you can't shoehorn fairness into every single scenario. Versus, let's compare that with someone who has Aries in their 12th house. That was never an issue for you, was it? In fact, it's kind of the opposite. For you, when it comes to hidden truths and the things that you have to cope with in terms of loss and endings and moving on, I think you tend to rush those things. So for you, your 12th house year might be a lot about slowing down and going, hey, hold on. Sometimes you need some follow through. You can't just light everything that you don't like on fire and call it a day. Aries and Libra are opposite each other, so while Libra is the peacemaker, Aries is the war maker. While your Libra 12th house year might come with lessons like, don't be afraid to assert your will, and if that causes drama, well, it causes drama. Your Aries 12th house year might be like, listen, you cause so much drama, you gotta calm down. Maybe you do need to compromise and people please every now and then. It's not a betrayal of your true nature. It's just you being a better member of society. Sometimes getting what you want means you gotta play the game and go along with things. So that's about it for this week's episode. I know it was a bit of a long one, but thanks for bearing with me, and I hope you learned something valuable. We're not done talking about profection years. This is part 1, and next week we're going to get into the planets in your chart and how you can really dial in your own unique birth chart to get an even more effective profection year reading. So we're going to be looking at ruling planets and then also your natal planetary placements as a whole and how they factor into profection year readings. There's also going to be a part 3, but that's not coming out for a little bit, and that's going to be profection year stories. So just like I shared a whole bunch of examples here, I want to hear examples from you. If you have an interesting profection year story, I want to hear about it. I'm going to do a call out on social media and on Substack, and if you're listening and you want to share a story, get in touch with me. Shoot me an email at omg@omgtarot.com or DM me. You should know my handle by now, but in the event you don't, it's its_omg_tarot. You don't have to share any personal details that you're not comfortable with sharing. I'll change your name if you want, change any identifying details. Just if you've got a good astrology story, share it, because that's how we learn. And as always, if you like what you've heard, leave me a 5-star review. It really does help. You can also get notified every single time a new episode of OMG Tarot comes out by subscribing. All right, catch you soon. Bye-bye.